I would like to tell you a story about land and water. In 2022, the City of Laramie and the Conservation Fund bought an 8,200-acre ranch on the Big Laramie River from the Bath family of Albany County. The Baths had owned the property since 1928. The price was a little more than $12 million. The ranch came with very valuable senior water rights from 1868 on both the Dallin Ditch and Sand Creek. In 2022 and 23, with support from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service purchased 3,600 of those acres that had been temporarily acquired by the Conservation Fund to expand the Wyoming Toad Conservation Area. In short, 9.5 miles of riverside terrain, including thousands of acres of prime wildlife habitat, went from private ownership to public stewardship. How did this happen? Should it have happened? What will happen next? These questions continue to rattle inside my head. Maybe some of you here can help me answer them. I've lived in Laramie 29 years. Until 2022, I would have said to you the chances of Laramie expanding its ranching footprint were slim to none. Laramie is famously poor, with no access to oil, gas, or coal severance taxes. And the last time Laramie purchased land for its water rights in 1981, the city was sued not once, but twice. And the public outcry both inside the city and out was significant. As one of my sources said, the whole community blew up. It seemed unlikely our politicians would wander into that thicket again. Also, in 2022, Wyoming's Governor Mark Gordon had made it clear that he was not fond of private land ending up in public hands. He opposed the sale of the Martone Ranch in Natrona County to the BLM in 2022. Further, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association's official stance on the issue is clear. Ranch land is private land, and it should stay that way. Okay, here we have a map I pulled from the city website. This is Laramie, outlined in green. This in blue is Monolith Ranch, which the city purchased in 1981. The land I'm talking about here in gold were the Bath family holdings. Here's Hutton Lake Natural Wildlife Refuge and Mortenson Lake, which these are both critical toad spots. What this map does not show is that the gold right now is a mix of US FWS and city property, but it does give you a sense of how much of the riverside now lies in public hands. So, who flipped the script on my expectations? How and why did they do it? I'm not a journalist. I'm a fiction writer with an abiding interest in how folks, especially rural people, tell their stories. In late 2023, I set out to record an oral history of the sale of Bath Ranch to preserve some of those stories. And again, I'm not a historian, so this is based on what people have told me, which means I think it's fabulous, but also not fully consistent, perhaps. A key player in the situation, of course, is the Bath family. The first Baths arrived in Albany County in March of 1868, 2 months before the Union Pacific Railroad. Of German heritage, they had been shopkeepers in New York City and veterans of the Civil War. They made their mark early, establishing the city's first hotel at the corner of First and Grand. They bought land along the Little Laramie that remains in family hands to this day. Before 1900, they had lost a horse herd to the Arapaho and shot the last living buffalo in the valley. They played football for UW, won busting buckles at Cheyenne Frontier Days. In 1908, County Sheriff Alfred Bath was infamously shot dead by an outlaw on the road to North Park, Colorado. His killer was never captured. By the time third-generation Henry Bath and his wife Bessie pieced together their 8,000 acres a few miles west of the city, Henry's business acumen was legendary inside the family and out. Henry knew how to make a deal. And I'll explain this in a second. He bought up chunks of what had originally been the Hutton Home Ranch, established by Charlie Hutton in 1866 along the route of Ben Holliday's Overland Trail. So this is a chunk from the oldest hand-drawn map from Albany County from 1869. This is the Big Laramie River. The ranch is marked here. This is the Big Laramie Stage Station, which is now Richardson's Overland Trail Ranch. This is the road from Fort Sanders This is the Overland Trail, and this eventually here was a road that went to North Park, and so the ranch was literally at the intersection of all settler activity in the county for a stretch. Hutton, one of Laramie's true settler characters, was a wheeler dealer himself. It said he unloaded some cows and maybe some horses on riverside land he acquired from the Union Pacific in exchange for grading rail bed. After a long, hard winter, his livestock was so fat, the grass in the floodplains of the valley was so nutritious that Hutton vowed to make that land the center of his sprawling empire. Hutton's luck eventually ran out. In 1884, he sold his home ranch, but the foundation he laid was more lasting than his fortune. Some of the territory's first irrigation ditches, including the Dallin Ditch, were dug by men, mules, and dynamite along that stretch of river. And Hutton had filed in 1868 the very first claim to water rights on the Big Laramie. The Hutton Home Ranch, which lay at the intersection of the Overland Trail, Fort Sanders, and the road to North Park, continues to be studied by archaeologists and historians as one of Wyoming's first agricultural operations. The property changed hands, names, and cattle brands several times between 1868 and 1928. The city, by the way, currently calls its portion Hart Ranch in relation to Hart Road, which is off 230, to avoid confusion with continuing holdings by the Bath family in the county. What never changed hands was guaranteed access to water and the quality of grass that grows in those floodplains. Yet by 2019, Henry and Bessie Bass, who were long gone, had had 4 children and were survived by more than a dozen heirs, most of whom no longer lived in Wyoming. What did the Bath family want, first and foremost? To keep the ranch in the family. But if no one in the family could afford to buy the place, they hoped to pass their legacy to someone who would pay fair market value and continue to work the land. Laramie is a railroad town. When Grenville Dodge surveyed his route for the Union Pacific, the confluence of the Big and Little Laramie rivers, what the Crow Nation called the land of many cottonwoods, didn't interest him as much as the cool, clear flow of water from what is now known as City Springs. As high and windy as Laramie is, it's doubly blessed when it comes to water. There's the sweet, plentiful Casper Aquifer, which currently provides 60% of the city's water. The Big Laramie via pipeline that runs more than 20 miles from Nearwood's Landing provides the other 40%. How did the city get access to water rights on the river before 2022? As best I can tell, the city took small nibbles when it had the chance. It was at the mercy of the railroad when it came to water from City Springs. The railroad would always have access first, a fact that was made clear during World War II when the UP was running trains, steam engines, almost 24 hours a day, and took all the water available from the springs, leaving the city high and dry. Sometime around World War II, and I have not been able to fix this date clearly from my sources, but I know it's in the legal documents somewhere, Laramie bought a small sliver of water rights from Henry and Bessie Bath. In 1981, the city purchased Monolith Ranch and its rights, but it wasn't enough. Not for a growing city, especially if anything ever happened to the Casper Aquifer. So what did the city want in 2019 when the rumor mill began to whisper Bath Ranch was going up for sale? A stable supply of water. Who had that water? The Baths. And the Baths, it was said, were not too fond of the government. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service mission is, quote, to work with others to conserve, protect, enhance fish, wildlife, and plants and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. But Fish and Wildlife, like all federal agencies, has evolved. I've interviewed 3 generations of biologists for this project. The old guard, the scientists who came of age in the 1970s and 80s in the wake of legislation like the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, have pioneering tales to tell. Those folks are very, very interesting people. Those tales, however, don't always feature traits such as patience, communication, and collaboration. According to some, early federal agents in the West tended to come at problems hard. When the Wyoming toad, and I give you a crude summary of the species here, I hope we'll talk about the toad more later. When the toad, a glacial relic that had long been plentiful if isolated in the Laramie Basin, appeared to have gone extinct in the late 1970s, assumptions got ahead of science. Were pesticides to blame, especially those sprayed by local ranchers? Was something else killing the toads? By the time the last dozen toads were discovered and collected from Mortenson Lake, not far north of Bath Ranch, and the toad was officially classified as endangered, emotions and grumpiness were running high. Despite the best efforts of some scientists, relationships with some local landowners spoiled. In some places in the valley, it would be decades before a federal scientist would be welcome again. In some places, suspicions linger to this day. As far as I can tell, the Bath family and its various tenants chose not to participate in any federal government programs at any time. But people change, or time heals some wounds, and personal relationships are powerful. Trust can change the equation. What did Fish and Wildlife want in 2019 when the Bath Ranch was just about to hit the market? It wanted to meet its mission and expand the Wyoming Toad Conservation Area established in 2015, but it wanted to do so as a partner, not a regulator. So, how did all this happen? In an interview after interview for this project, folks named 3 people as being critical to the purchase of Bath Ranch. Mindy Meade at Fish and Wildlife, Darren Parkin, then the Natural Resources Director for the City of Laramie, and Dan Schlager, Wyoming Director for the Wyoming Conservation Fund. Those 3 do not talk about themselves much. They are slow to take credit. So I will suggest this. Even in a digital age, maybe especially in a digital age, you need doers to get things done. You need people who are willing to leave their desks and visit and talk and play the long game. You need people who will craft a vision of the future greater than themselves. It helps to have short, efficient decision chains. The city and the Conservation Fund had those. But you still need individuals, bureaucrats or not, who are willing to act. Almost everyone who daydreamed about this deal, who thought it represented high value for humans and critters alike, didn't believe it would actually happen. A billionaire would buy the 8,000 acres and lock it up as a private hunting preserve. That almost happened. A developer would buy the land and subdivide it. At least one developer took a hard look. Some jerk or set of jerks from Colorado, a city, a county, venture capitalist, you name it, would acquire the land for its phenomenally valuable water rights and find a way to transfer that precious water south. The financial challenges were enormous and complex, so were the legal challenges. The politics were dicey. The Baths would surely be reluctant to sell to the government. The city was not their idea of an heir. There were just too many hurdles. Still, a small group of folks never quit, and they beat the odds. A deal was completed that I would say benefited city residents, the toad, and anyone in Albany County who cherishes open space. How? This is what my interviews suggest. 1, local savvy matters. Both Mindy Meade of Fish and Wildlife and Ben Levin, Laramie's current Natural Resources Administrator, are with me today. You're going to see them soon. They've lived in Albany County a long time. When you have the chance, I hope you'll ask them questions. Darren Parkin, who couldn't be here, met Mindy Meade around 15 years ago. They talked, they shared, they speculated. Darren was not and is not shy. He's a hydrographer. He's constantly imagining ways that Laramie might get more water, but he wasn't optimistic about the options. Mindy's motives were probably more nuanced. I'll let her speak for herself. What's clear to me is these 2 individuals determined they had some common goals. What if a beloved working ranch could remain a beloved working ranch, at least for now? What if the city could achieve water security and the Wyoming toad could gain access to critical habitat? As they articulated those goals, they drew in other stakeholders, found partners, tamped down objections, told their stories. The end result was an innovative multi-party real estate deal that provided each participant with some, if not all, of what it wanted. 2, culture is crucial but not unchanging. The Laramie River has been described as the most regulated river in the state. From April to October, not one single drop, not one spit wad of moisture goes unaccounted for, just ask Ben. The Little Laramie, thanks to subdivision, features over 100 rights holders, some of them pretty sassy. The Big Laramie, however, remains the site of fewer larger ranches. There are far fewer significant rights holders, between the Colorado border and the city boundary. Most of them are running cattle and or growing hay. I think it's possible one reason this deal didn't implode is that those stakeholders cherish open space. They might roll their eyes at the prospect of a city or the feds, for gosh sakes, owning and running local outfits. They might even cuss about it some. But if those outfits are growing hay and raising cattle, if they are participating in the culture, maybe that's acceptable. I've been told Ben Levine's phone rings a lot these days. You can ask him. Younger ranchers may not be able to afford to buy land in the valley right now, but they are looking for good property to lease. 3, nonprofits weave the community webs. This sale would not have happened without the Conservation Fund. Dan Schlager is a humble diplomat and a gifted listener, and probably the single most important individual to the preservation of conservation in the state of Wyoming in the last 10 years. We can talk about that later. The Conservation Fund, Ducks Unlimited, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the Wyoming Stock Growers Land Trust, the Audubon Society, the Nature Conservancy, each of these groups was mentioned during my interviews. When you add in other supporters like Wyoming Game and Fish and the Laramie River Conservation District, you expand the boundaries of community. Most of all, you have the opportunity to supercharge trust. One of the byproducts of this project is my deepened admiration for public employees. These people love what they do, they are passionate, and they are skilled. But public employees are sometimes constrained. Dan Schlager could approach the Bath family in ways government employees could not. His organization could also write a large check quickly and without bureaucratic delay. 4, luck was a factor. Not long after the ranch hit the market, the pandemic struck. COVID constrained the assets of at least one billionaire who was vacuuming up property in the region. Also, the title search launched by the family uncovered a big surprise. When Henry and Bessie Bath sold that small sliver of water rights to Laramie more than 80 years ago, they also awarded the city a right to first refusal for the purchase of the rest of the ranch and its water. No one in the family and no one at the city knew this. The discovery was an utter shock, but it mattered. It didn't guarantee the city's success. Laramie needed a partner to defray the appraised value of more than $12 million. It could never have bought the ranch on its own. But first refusal gave the city a legal lever that opened the door to new variations on a deal with the family. In conclusion, I want to suggest this unusual 4-party ranch sale was a truly forward-thinking deal, a model of collaboration. One of my sources called it a win-win-win situation. It's a good story, and I think we need to share more good stories. But the transaction was not without costs. Members of the Bath family continue to grieve the loss of the land. Some folks claim the city was sneaky, since most discussions about the pending purchase were held in executive session out of public view. The city now owns more than 16,000 acres of ranch land, and people want to know what kind of neighbor the city will be and how it's going to behave as a major ag force in the county. Some say the federal government has no business directing resources toward fish and wildlife, particularly something as, quote, non-charismatic, unquote, as a toad. Although, and this is very interesting to me, those naysayers were silent in 2022. There was not a peep from Governor Gordon or anyone else. The future holds a lot of questions, and as we segue into a day's discussion of water in the West, I'd like to share some of those questions with you and see what you think, and maybe we can gnaw on them for a while. Why do you think Wyoming politicians didn't raise objections to this deal? We can talk about how the city politicians responded, but nothing, nada, from anybody else. Will state water law remain the same? If not, why not? Does conservation of a single species inevitably result in forms of the greater good? How will Americans view the Fish and Wildlife mission into the future? And finally, what does the phrase open space mean, and how might Western cities and towns adapt their thinking about urban-rural interfaces, especially when it comes to water? As for the former Bath Ranch, for the moment, optimism lingers in the air. The city is refining its ranching practices with an eye toward an evolving future of water use, conservation, and potential transfer. Fish and Wildlife is committed to the survival of the toad and all species central to its mission. The Conservation Fund continues to play a quiet, critical role in conservation-driven deals such as the recent purchase of the Kelly parcel in Grand Teton National Park. The purchase of Bath Ranch on behalf of the public was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. It featured plenty of short-term failure. But enough people believed in it deeply and in concert to see it through. As one participant told me, eyes damp with tears, quote, "This deal brought out the best in us. It's the most important work I've ever done." That's all I'm gonna say for right now. And I hope I have set the stage. I would like to ask Mindy and Ben to come up here, please. For 30 years, Mindy Meade has worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. She works in partnership with private landowners to restore habitat while supporting viable agricultural and sustainable rural communities. The emphasis of her work is on protecting vulnerable habitats and maintaining federal trust species populations. Her technical expertise includes river and wetland restoration, improving fish passage, and managing range condition through grazing management and invasive species control. And I have to say, when I first met Mindy, she told me she knew she was destined to work for Fish and Wildlife because she worked at a national wildlife refuge as a young teenager in Montana, and that was it. She was hooked from then on. So she's a Montanan, but we welcome her. She's been here for a long time. Ben Levin has lived in Laramie for 25 years. He's a UW graduate with a degree in geography and a minor in rangeland ecology and watershed management, and might be the only person who knew how to get to this room faster than I did. So good job. After college, he went to work for Tri-Hydro Corporation, managing environmental, regulatory, and compliance projects for 20 years prior to coming to work for the City of Laramie in January of 2025. So he's on the ground doing new work, doing new things, and I'm super grateful to have both of these folks with us today. I'm going to ask them each a question. I have many questions for them, but what I'm hoping is that you will wish to ask them some questions as well. So I'm going to start with Mindy, and honest to God, Mindy, Darren, and Dan are the ones people told me over and over again. I don't care which facet of the discussion they came from. These folks were mentioned, and they were mentioned for their highly collaborative, listening, thinking, imagining kinds of skills. Mindy, you've been here for a long time. You've raised your family in this valley. This was a complicated land sale legally and financially. It involved a family, the city, the federal government for whom you work, the Conservation Fund, and priceless water rights. How do you think it got done? What was the key?
I still have no idea. And that's the honest truth. I think it all really boiled down to passion and connection. I think that connection really drives where life takes us. In my world, for me, I can speak for myself, in that that connection was really to that sense of place, that nature, but also to the people in my community and wanting to do right for my community.
That's good. We might just ask you later what that means, but that's a heartfelt. This is how she makes her way in the world, and it's pretty cool. Ben, the City of Laramie, big honkin' ranching operation that it is now, is consolidating operations and assessing its properties. So I will say this, and you can quickly correct me. I think this is the second year out of many decades that, for instance, there are no cattle on the land, right? The land is being rested and assessed. So from your perspective, what, especially when it comes to water use, are the city's top priorities in the short term, the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, good question. So really anytime we're talking about the ranch, our number one priority is protecting our water rights. And since the city acquired the Bath Ranch 2 years ago, we've had the Monolith Ranch since 1981. It's well established. We always had a lessee on site that managed the haying, the cattle grazing, all that. With the city acquiring the Bath Ranch, it was obvious those two entities needed to be tied together over the year. At some point in time, those two ranches were one ranch. Irrigation was tied together, roads, fencing, all of that was one piece of property. Since we acquired it, they had been separated. Our current priority right now is, as Alyson mentioned, assessing range condition, soil condition. How has these properties been managed, as well as tying infrastructure back to each other, irrigation ditches, finding the best way to be efficient with our water. But like I said, everything we do has that main goal of protecting those water rights.
Thank you. Mindy, could you follow up and say how U.S. Fish and Wildlife is managing sort of right now in the short term that beautiful property?
So right now, that property that the Fish and Wildlife Service purchased is called the Wyoming Toad Conservation Area. And as you can imagine, when anyone, whether they're private or otherwise, acquires a piece of property, your number one objective is to figure out what you just bought. And so we are in that part of our growth, is figuring out what we bought. That includes understanding the water rights, that includes understanding the culture that is there. Some of those historic maps that were shown, if you follow them, there are at least 4 known locations on our Fish and Wildlife Service property that may or may not have cultural significance. Sand Creek Road also went through there. So we are in the process of working with the state archaeologist office here on campus to evaluate some of those resources. We are in a holding pattern. The government does not allow us to move forward on management until we define what our management should look like and justify it. That property was established for the Wyoming toad. When the National Wildlife Refuge, let me step you back. When the National Wildlife Refuge System takes possession of property, they must designate its intent. And so Hutton Lake National Wildlife Refuge was purchased with migratory birds in mind. And when they purchased what is now the Wyoming Toad Conservation Area, they specified that the Wyoming toad is the highest priority use. That means that just when an administration change occurs, we can't suddenly shift our objectives. We must always go back to the foundation. And the Wyoming toad was that foundation. And so we have other objectives, birds, fish, etc. But the Wyoming toad is a designated species of interest on that property. So all management from now and into the future must support that species. And so we are in the process of doing the justifications for that. We would like to see cattle back out on that landscape, as we would have loved to have had it this year, but we are our own worst enemy with paperwork. And so much to us locally, our dismay, we did not have cattle out there. That ranch has also had a history of haying. Again, we have opportunities to learn about haying and the impacts to Wyoming toad or the potential benefits to the Wyoming toad. And so we're figuring that out. We're in limbo, but I hope that we have cattle out there next summer. In the meantime, we continue to use our water rights for agriculture to produce forage so that we can maintain them.
And Mindy, how big was the Sand Creek rights that U.S. Fish and Wildlife? How many CFS?
So when we acquired the property, it came with 1871 water rights that were just a little bit short of, these are the territorial oldest water rights. They are owned by the Fish and Wildlife Service now, just short of 12.5 CFS. All said and done, Sand Creek water rights on paper are about 25 CFS on Sand Creek. On the Laramie River, we have the oldest water right we have is in 1892, and that is for just shy of 13.7. On paper, there are junior water rights around 17 CFS. So combined, you're looking about 42 CFS between both of those tributaries that are tied directly to the Wyoming Toad Conservation Area.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, so with when the city acquired the Bath Ranch, the water rights associated with those lands was about 10.5 CFS, and that would add to the existing water rights we had from the Monolith Ranch of just over 20 CFS. So in total, those all come through the Dowland Ditch, which is the #1 priority on the Big Laramie River. It's an 1868 water right. The city has about 31 CFS. There is an additional landowner, a neighbor to ours, that has about 1.8 CFS. And then as Alyson mentioned earlier, the city does have about 14 CFS water rights that has already been transferred to municipal use for Laramie's drinking water. So.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to open the floor for questions. Otherwise, I'll keep asking. Thank you. Yes, just
Great story. I really appreciate it. I'm Jason Robbins. I'm a teacher at law school, teach water at Step Law School. I'm trying to understand the water rights situation better. When the story was being told, I was partially thinking about situations like Owens Valley in Los Angeles back in the day, right? Much more negative and kind of declensionist narrative there. This seems does differently. But as far as the water rights go, like, are some of the water rights held by Fish and Wildlife Service for street flows and then others held by City of Laramie for consumptive use? Like, what's going to happen to the river in conjunction with the exercise of those water rights? Is this good for the river in terms of riparian habitat restoration and even like aquatic ecosystem? Or is most of this water just going to be consumptively used as Laramie grows?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll hand up to Mindy. I guess nothing really changed with the water rights. Except the owner. You know, those water rights were being used consumptively on the ranch for irrigation. That's what the city continues to do. As we all know, if you have water rights, if you don't use them, you lose them. So we actively manage the water rights. We have a big irrigation program on the city ranch. We do have a big focus on conservation, increasing, conservation efforts. We have a lot of partners that we work with, obviously with Mindy, Game and Fish, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Ducks Unlimited. We have a lot of conservation focused projects like that. But our 31 CFS of water on the ranch is used consumptively. We do have return flows, but really nothing I don't believe has really changed with that because they were being used previously too. And, I've said our focus is protecting those water rights. The reason the city bought these ranches, even back in 1981 and even back in the 40s, is it's an insurance policy. If the city of Laramie was to grow, double in size, we would petition to the Board of Control to transfer agricultural water rights to municipal use. That's not a one-to-one transfer. If we have 31 feet of water, we wouldn't get 31 feet of water. But there's a process to petition to transfer those water rights. But it's an insurance policy. Right now, we get 60% of our water from the aquifer, about 40% from the river. The aquifer is an incredible resource for the city of Laramie. I don't think the majority of people understand that, and I'm still learning that. I learned from a lot of people, even in this room. I've learned a lot. But it's an incredible resource. It needs a lot of protection. That's why we have these protection plans to protect the aquifer. The ranch is just an insurance policy. If anything ever happens to the ranch, or if the city of Laramie doubles in size, we could potentially transfer that water to municipal use.
I have to tell one small anecdote that I learned. The water in the aquifer is so good that when Harold Bergman, maybe 50 years ago, set up an aquatic laboratory out at the Red Buttes Center, they did it because that water is so good that it takes almost no work to make it perfect for aquatic species research. And that facility is now, of course, one of the key Wyoming toad research facilities in the world. So it's an interesting little connection. But we all need to recognize that we have something that very few cities in the West have, which is water you almost don't have to treat to drink.
The future, I'm going to step into your world a minute so you can clarify if you need to, but the future of Wyoming water is very scary. And when we entered, Darren Parkin and I entered into discussions about this water, Darren said, if we get this water from the Dowland diversion, the city won't likely need to use that water for municipal use for at least 20 years. And I thought, 20 years is better than turning it to another state or turning it to another municipality that can take it immediately through the Poudre River or through Eaton Reservoir, through the Wilson Supply Ditch. They can take it immediately. And I thought, 20 years buys us time. That timeline has since changed to at least 30 years. And that is due to efficiencies that the city has been making. And I think it's really important that you as a community be aware of what your city has done for you and the vision that they have provided. Because that water literally could have gone away immediately.
One of my sources said you can't put enough zeros after a 1 to come up with what's that's worth in Colorado. You cannot. And I will say, I don't have it on the record, but Jackie Bass, who I was the honor to interview a few months before she passed, one of the final things she said to me, and she had wished things had gone a different way, but she said, well, at least the water stayed in Wyoming.
So to step into my world, the water for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as far as we are concerned at this moment, it is tied very directly to agriculture. And so we will continue to use that. We will get grazing back out on the landscape. We will get hopefully haying back out on the landscape. That has been part of the development of that water. It is part of the tradition. It is necessary for the Wyoming toad. And we can step into those conversations at any point, but we will continue to maintain the water rights for agricultural use. Those will be through agricultural producer leases on that. I'm not going into the business of running cattle and making money. We will be leasing those out to the agricultural community. In the instance that we have right now, we actually do have a lessee who in this early spring drought would have loved nothing more than to put his cattle out on ours to give his private lands a break. Remember, I'm a private land person. I'm not with a National Wildlife Refuge System. And so my objectives are to try and keep him and his habitat in as good a position as possible for birds and other species of special concern. And so our goal in having him as a leasee would be to be able to defer some of his grazing, take pressure off of his lands, and allow this to be some sort of a structured grass bank that can be used to benefit the toad and agriculture.
Other questions? Thank you. You three work it out. Each of you are titans in your own way.
Well, my question is for all of you. It goes back to something you said early on, Alyson. So many of us Wyoming natives are raised to hate the big boys who roll into these rich guys that are taking over our state. But we're begrudgingly coming to understand that there's a great deal of conservation and shit. That when Kim Baker, Ted Turner comes in by the bazillion acres. So play that scenario out. Say this bad cat had come in and bought the whole place. Would that not have been nice for the toads and for maintaining agricultural culture?
I love you so much. No, I do, because you're such a great, yes, thank you. Great question.
So I'll start, and I don't know if you'll want to continue. But when we were evaluating, and I can't speak for the city, I was speaking for the Fish and Wildlife Service, my role with private landowners. The mission is always to promote private land ownership. And so my heart was in it for the Bath family to win it and to keep a piece of the ranch that they could have. They've held it for generations. And when I first looked over across that fence in 2010 at that property, I said, wow, they're doing an amazing job. It is more beautiful than Hutton Lake and has bird diversity on it, far greater in my opinion. And so we had hoped to keep it in private land. And at one point we entertained, it was kind of like a dichotomy, if you will. If the paths can't have it, then who can have it? And I actually looked into conservation buyers. When I say conservation buyers, I mean people whose objectives, yes, they generally tend to be wealthy enough that their livelihood does not depend on the agriculture, but they align with community and public resource needs. We did not find that person. We tried. But it could have been, it was our number 2 option behind the Bath family retaining ownership. Then, when we couldn't find it, then, just so you all know, I asked Wyoming Game and Fish if they were interested in it, knowing that they might not have the agricultural ability, but they'd figure it out. And they were at a point in their economic cycles where they could not afford to bring on any. But they said, not only yes, but hell yes, keep moving forward. And so we eventually moved forward as best. So I don't know that that answers your question, but I do believe that had we had the opportunity to find the right connection of people, it would have been just fine in agriculture.
You can mix a skeptical stakeholder that the toads are important to search.
So I don't think in this instance it was all about the Wyoming toad. I remember receiving a call that Washington, D.C. said, what, they want to make a toad ranch. They want to make a toad ranch? And I said to myself, we are not telling the right story, or the right story is not being conveyed, because this is far greater than a toad ranch. This is about preserving your migratory birds, a federal trust species. The toad was identified as number 1. Migratory birds are a very close second. Then, Wyoming Game and Fish has a whole suite of species of greatest conservation need fish that are out there. Brassy minnow, Iowa darter. Then you throw in an entire community that is reliant on the water making it through, and the ecological values of maintaining that water all the way from far into Colorado, all the way from Colorado down to where the point of diversion. It's significant. I remember just looking at the Wyoming side and saying, that's at least 50 miles of water that's just roughly estimated, not looking at meanders. 50 miles of water that we are protecting fish for you. Not only trout, but brassy minnow, Iowa darters. And people, when they think of the Fish and Wildlife Service, they often go immediately to the Endangered Species Act. But my job is to prevent any of those things from ever getting on those lists. And you have to do that. You have to protect those water resources. Now, had this property not come with those valuable water resources, this refuge would not be. So it is not about the toad. It is about a community, whether that community is environmental, whether that community is wildlife and fish, while it is unique habitat, or while it is the community of Laramie. It is about community.